Well, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Collision Live. Maybe it's Daniel here, as always, joined at the desk by the blues to my clues, Mr. Samuel David Camp.
That's right on brand and right culturally relevant for this week's
as we
show.
We'll be diving into some little blues clues, little childhood memories, but we won't necessarily be doing so live. So we aren't live.
Kind of live.
We're kind of live. We are projecting ourselves into the future, like some Christopher Nolan sci-fi film. Things are crazy. Schedules are crazy.
You're going like crazy. You've got a lot of big filming coming up.
Yeah, so
for
I'll
a big
be
project, and so that's exciting.
So we're doing this one pre-recorded. The next 2 weeks, we're taking a little hiatus from the Collision Live. I'll be out of town both those weeks, doing some projects and some vacation. Just gone.
More on those projects maybe later on, but so we're excited about that.
Yeah, we'll keep you up to date with some of that, but. So there won't be any Collision Live episodes after this one for a couple weeks, but then we will be back better than ever, rested, maybe have a nice tan. But we're excited. We didn't want to take off 3 weeks, even though our schedules didn't allow us to do this one live. So I thought we'd still do a pre-recorded episode. It's just me and Sam. We don't have our Collision crew, but we are both ready to talk about some pop culture.
Talking to an empty room.
So why don't we just jump right into it, to our first segment, Pop Culture News. So a couple of things are sort of newsy. Some of them we're going to get into more in our topics. But probably the main one, the Matrix 4 trailer was released. I know there's been a lot of buzz. I think that's coming out theaters and HBO Max in December, perhaps. So we'll be talking about that a bit. Speaking of movies coming to theaters, Venom: Let There Be Carnage, the sequel to the first Venom movie, which I have not seen, was just bumped up earlier, kind of going against the grain of all these movies getting postponed. So that'll be coming out in October, and I'm planning to do a review for that. I don't know. I didn't even know this project existed. I kind of wish I still didn't. Bel Air is like a reboot of the Fresh Prince of Bel Air, starring Will Smith. They just announced that they found the new lead, and this is kind of like a gritty, more dramatic retelling of the Bel Air. So I think without kind of the Will Smith comedy aspect, and more just telling kind of the story, and more kind of more grounded take. Doesn't sound interesting. Doesn't sound anything that I'm super interested in, but we will see. Lego Star Wars, it was announced a couple weeks ago, and we just didn't get to talk about it. But I don't know if you saw like the Lego Christmas special. That thing is so good.
No, I need to see that.
Well, Christmas is coming not too far into the future.
Exactly.
According to Cracker Barrel and Walmart and some of those stores. But this is like their Halloween special, and it looks clever. Lego stuff is always funny.
Yeah,
and as a parent,
are always great.
I enjoy getting into that. But any of those that kind of stood out to you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think anything that the sort of the Lego movie mashup franchise puts out, I feel like it's just always filled with great takes and one-liners, and so that's super fun. And then obviously we'll talk about this coming up, but the Matrix 4, that's kind of an interesting time for that to be coming out, and I think there's a lot of cultural relevance to that still. So it should be interesting. Yeah, well, why don't we, you save me the need to have a clever segue. Let's jump right into the Matrix 4. I will admit from the start that I've technically not seen The Matrix. I've probably seen like 80% of it in bits and pieces over the years. Yeah. I just haven't actually sat down from start to finish and watched the whole movie. So I know most of the plot. I've seen most of the scenes. I know kind of the whole discussion around. I don't know if are you a Matrix guy at all? I mean, it's been like years. I think I've seen the first one. I mean, I know the general gist of it. I can't remember if I've seen all of them or not. But yeah, I mean, I was never like a diehard fan. Loved the soundtrack from the original. I remember that being really good. But no, I haven't been a huge like Matrix person, but I've always found it as fascinating, I think, as the next person. So like,
yeah, and it's kind of one of those like. Sort of I guess the curse of being like a revolutionary film in the kind of that's starting to get dated or older is that I get a lot of the stuff that it like brought new to the table is being so overdone, and like in so many other movies that it's almost like people watching Star Wars now for the first time and being like, what's so special about this? Like, we've seen this sort of 1,000 times. Right. And it's like, well, you've seen it 1,000 times because it was so special. Like a lot of the Matrix, like the action and stuff. Like nowadays, it's not as like what, just how did they do that? Like because you've seen it so much.
Yeah, I mean, both technologically speaking, and I feel like also just thematically. I just think it was very groundbreaking in a lot of ways, and especially visually. That was, I think, the stunning thing about it. It was just like, it was just so like totally different and like not like anything we'd ever seen before.
Yeah, and that's kind of like the visually and just the way they shot things was so groundbreaking. Reminds me even of like the way they're doing like the Mandalorian and stuff now, like just changing the industry. But kind of the thematic part is sort of what I thought we could jump into, because I think part of the reason why besides just like the visuals and stuff, that this movie has kind of stood the test of time and just being such like a constant presence is in culture and spoofs and in who knows how many sermon illustrations is just because it did deal with kind of more thinking, intellectual, this interesting themes. And I think sometimes we think of, I think Christians in the church is almost even more guilty than most for doing this. Of like, we just reduce film and stuff to like entertainment, or it's like a product that we consume, and it's very just sort of diverting, and like or else it's just sort of emotional experience.
Yeah, it's an amusement, a way to pass the time. It's a leisure thing, and just it's not very like there's not a lot of brain power that's used to consume. Yeah, it's a kind of a consumer product,
which is really a kind of a more recent perspective on the arts. Because if you go back, like as I was an English major in college, like looking back on like the poets and some of the entertainers, like even like Shakespeare and some of those guys, like they were also the philosophers and like the thinkers, and like they were the ones that were using arts to raise questions and work things out. Like they wanted to entertain too.
I think that was the thing. Like I would imagine, especially in Shakespeare's day, it would have to be raucously entertaining first, but then you could really like poke at political things or uncomfortable topics in a way that disarmed the audience. And I think that was a real gift of Shakespeare, is that he could do these things in such a sneaky way that like you can see that he's making fun of the current king or whatever, and but it's so entertaining that no one, few people either caught it or pushed back on it. And so
you kind of need to, because I was having a conversation with my brother recently about like, Tenet. I think I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, but just where it is so intellectual that it almost ceases to have the fun aspect. And so like, there is a balance, but I thought we could just sort of not dive super deep into it, but just what is sort of the role of cinema or just the arts in general to actually raise sort of interesting questions and present just situations and stuff that go beyond just, hey, that was awesome, I love the action, I felt pumped up after this, let's move on. Like, is there sort of a role for cinema to actually dig into like philosophy and the mindset of our culture?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think for all the arts, like I think there's certainly a place, and I think in some ways a responsibility for the arts to dive into topics and ideas and concepts and even politics, and I know we've talked about this in a number of different ways, but I think I don't think like some would say. I think most recently Lin-Manuel Miranda would say that all art is politics, and it's like, well, I don't know that I would go that far, but I think there's certainly an element, really a way that art can deal and explore ideas and philosophies and even politics in a way that only art can do, that pundits or politicians or just the thinking public can't really do. And so I think the arts lends itself to be a more nuanced approach and a way to explore ideas and philosophies in a way that you just can't do necessarily even like in conversation, or even in like an essay, or even in just sort of a speech or some other format that's just sort of getting this idea across. I think you can present it in a visual way, especially in cinema, that it's just unique to cinema.
And I think this adds visual, it just adds like a more of like an entry point. And I think part of why a film like The Matrix has been so popular for so long is that like it's not it's sort of open to interpretation. Like there's obviously Christians and youth pastors have been using it as a opening illustration ever since it came out, and they're still using it, still going strong. Like it can apply to so many
still
different
drawing from that well,
so many different things. And I think part of some of these kind of these film stuff, they almost like the more tied to a specific time, like commentary they have, like the less kind of classic or enduring they end up becoming. Like the irony is like both the directors of The Matrix have transitioned. Like they directed The Matrix as males. They are now female. And they've kind of looked back on that and like, well, the whole thing was, I think in the back of our mind we knew, and it's all an allegory for transitioning and transgenderism, and like they've attached a very specific kind of this is what it all meant. And I think like once you start doing that, it kind of loses some of its kind of classic appeal, where it's
right. Like, well, I was going to say, like, that's the power of art, is the interpretation of it. And so like when you get dogmatic about, no, this is actually, and I mean, for artists, like that's their prerogative. They can say, this is what I mean by this art. But I think good artwork stands on its own without sort of the artist having to like demand the public take its art in a certain way. And I think when you go to do that, then I think it loses its potency and power as a work of art. And I think just the half-life of that work sort of gets significantly reduced because you're sort of cementing it to a particular thing or a particular time. Then it just doesn't have the strength that it would otherwise have.
Yeah, and it's kind of like the obviously I always go back to Tolkien, but I think I've used before like his contrast of like allegory and applicability, where he's saying like allegory, when something just sort of has like this stands for this, that there's one interpretation, you almost have to like decode it, but that just sort of means one thing. Once you sort of uncover the code, you sort of okay, that represents where applicability, which is what he would think of like the Lord of the Rings as. Yeah. Like there isn't like a set interpretation. Like it can mean a bunch of different, he obviously had intentions when he wrote it, but it's not set to like one specific, interpretation or,
right.
Like I'm part of like the Tolkien Society, and there's a lot of people that on there that aren't Christians that have different worldviews than I do that kind of get different meaning out of it. So I guess before we move on real quick to the next topic, is this sort of, as far as like faith-based films and stuff, like, do you think there's a place for us as Christians to create stories that are less, that are more open to like interpretation and raising good questions rather than just sort of, this is our sermon about prayer, our sermon about fatherhood, and it's, this is the meaning and you need to be encouraged by it.
Yeah, well, yeah, I would say there is definitely room for that. And I think good art and good, let's say, faith-based films should be raising more questions, I think, than answering. And I think that's the mark of a good film, especially if it's if you're wanting to explore ideas. Then I don't think you want to like package up an answer and try and apply it to everyone who sees it. So I think I would tend to think that you should, if you're going to do a faith-based film, I think there's definitely room to do one in a way that just poses interesting questions to its audience in a way that leads to dialogue between people who see the film. And I think in many ways that can be a way more powerful experience and a more powerful tool, even if that's what you want it to be, than just sort of having everything nice and tidy and wrapped up by the end of the film. And
it's less sort of abrasive. Like I think a film that just is just pushing answers and worldviews becomes basically propaganda, like for whatever it is. The secular worldviews, Christian worldviews, like you're just sort of hammering home some believe this is why we, rather than just sort of pointing towards good questions, kind of pointing them on the right track.
Yeah, well, and that's what good teaching does too. And I think if you're a good teacher, you're helping your students come to those conclusions with good questions. And I think that there can be, or at least there should be, that in like faith-based films, is like you should be helping people with those good questions to get to those answers. And you're gonna learn more as a student if you're having to wrestle with these questions on the way through than if it's just like, hey, the answers to question one is A, question 2, it's B, like you're not going to retain any of that information like if in like the classroom setting. But if you have to like struggle through the questions and then you arrive at the truth, I think that's a way more impactful and powerful way to go about it.
Yeah, here's one of my favorite quotes just about as a writer, as a storyteller. This is Brandon Sanderson. It's actually it's from a character in his book, but kind of by proxy it represents Sanderson's own beliefs. But it says, the purpose of a storyteller is not to tell you how to think, but to give you questions to think upon. Yeah. And that's sort of been one of my guiding things. I think just as Christians, should be more of our kind of motto rather than just let's preach a sermon through film.
Right.
So jumping into our next segment, we have Host Corner. So Sam is up this time. I got my metal, my love of Norwegian power metal opera off my chest last week. So I set a low bar, so it shouldn't be hard to cross. But yeah. Sam, why don't you lace thing on us?
All right, so we'll put that timer up on the screen. And so sticking with the theme of music, if you haven't heard of the Irish folk singer, rock musician, all-around legend, Glenn Hansard, you should definitely look him up. He kind of came to fame with his movie with Marketa Irglova called Once. They formed a duo for a while called the Swell Seasons. They did really well. They won an Oscar for the well-known song Falling Slowly. Anyways, Glenn is just a legend musician and just one of these guys who is just an amazing, amazing artist and person. I got to see him live in Dublin, which was just incredible. But he's done all kinds of crazy things. Like he lived in Paris for a while when he wrote his latest record. He and a bunch of other Irish artists did the Camino de Santiago via rowboat. And it's just like, he's just a really cool guy, and you should definitely look him up.
Well, if metal opera was not your thing, then maybe Sam can fill in the gap. When you say kind of like, is this like easy listening, or is this like get up and do a jig on the table kind of?
I would say it's mostly easy listening. It's not folksy and like you know,
like a flogging kind of way.
No.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily. I mean, he's certainly like, he has a ton of soul in what he sings and performs, and so there are definitely some you know enjoyable and upbeat things to his music, but it's got a lot more soul to it, and it's not so much just like dancing a jig on a table in a bar type of music.
Well, you know what? Maybe I might check that out. We'll see. I do have a soft spot when I'm not listening to metal for some kind of folky, easy listening to while I work. So maybe I will try to round out my musical taste to include a little bit more than European symphonic power metal. But speaking of things that are that just feel good and enjoyable and kind of good for the soul, nostalgia. This sort of been the buzzword for a long time in culture, oftentimes in a negative sense. But we kind of saw this week the positive side of it. I don't know if you were a Blues Clues kid back in the day.
Not you too much.
I mean, dabbled. I
I dipped my toe in Blues Clues from now and again, but no, I'm certainly familiar and aware of Blues Clues.
So I wasn't necessarily, some diehard Blues Clues kid either, but I definitely saw the show.
I know the song.
But this thing that's been going around the internet, it's kind of gone viral. Blues Clues has been 25-year anniversary.
Yeah.
So congratulations to Blues Clues. But they had this sort of to promote their 25th anniversary. I don't know if they're like rebooting the show or what they're doing, but they kind of brought back some of these old hosts that had disappeared and like had been in some of the early episodes. Like, they're all grown up now, and kind of, talking to the audience, like almost like in character of where he's been. And they start singing the song about, you can't spell blues without you. And like, it's just one of those like,
just to feel good.
Yeah. Is our wife cooking onions in the other room? Like it's just sort of feel good, like kind of kids.
Hits you in all the emotions.
Yeah, it's wholesome, kind of nostalgia. And you kind of see, I just saw like in the internet, a lot of people commenting on this and sharing this, like their own like reaction to some of these characters. And I thought it was, I don't know, for me, I know we're guilty of this, like, even like with the, the Bel Air reboot or some of the stuff like.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of eye rolling when it comes to like nostalgia. Maybe let's call it nostalgia capital. Like there's a lot of that happening now, and a lot of it's very like, okay, like
Yeah.
Do we need to do like is that necessary? Like, do we need Fuller House? Like, was that something that everyone was asking for? You know?
Yeah. How do you know even Fuller House, the third reboot? But it's I think sometimes we almost equate like nostalgia with just sort of this like cynical cash grab by these studios. They're like, oh, the kids liked Ninja Turtles, let's reboot the Ninja Turtles. Like,
right, it's like, well, we can't think of anything original, so what properties do we have, in the mid 80s that we can bring back and resuscitate? Like,
and I think it's sort of led us to, even though nostalgia is such like a big selling point, literally a selling point in our culture, it's kind of lost. I think some of the doesn't get the credit for the role, like the positive side of it, that that it actually can unite and make us, there is comfort in it. What do you think? Like, what is the role of nostalgia, like the positive side of it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it should certainly like bring people together who have like common feelings over something that's nostalgic. And I think this episode of Blue's Clues and the original host coming back and sort of doing his monologue, and I think that's an example of nostalgia sort of at its peak, like doing what nostalgia does best, and that is just giving people all the feelings and bringing people together in a very happy and uplifting way that doesn't, at least it doesn't feel like a sort of a, hey, like, all these millennials or Gen Xers loved this show way back in the day, so let's reboot it and see if we can capitalize on their feelings, but in a way that's just sort of like, oh yeah, like you just sort of, hey, you remember that show that we used to watch? And it creates, I think, a dialogue and a conversation with people who all enjoyed something as kids, and I think that's very powerful, and I think that's sort of the best side of nostalgia.
Yeah, because there is a kind of innate to nostalgia. Like, it is manipulative to a sense. Like, like even like this Blue's Clues thing, like as they're designing this, they know like this is gonna hit hard. It's gonna hit hard. They know when they're posting that a bunch of like grown ups are gonna be, welcome back, Steve. Like like it's gonna hit the mark. But like I don't think that's necessarily always bad. Like I think anytime the worship band at church like cuts down and like starts building up the bridge, like that's also manipulate. It gets it's playing on your emotion. Like there's a reason they don't just play in one dynamic. It's because when they cut out to just voices, like it hits you different. And like I don't think that's bad. It's just pushing different kind of buttons on your emotion. I think there is comfort in. I think for me, even just like the original Star Wars movies are sort of like they're sort of my like comfort food. Like like I watch those. They're just sort of wholesome. I can just sort of enjoy them. They remind me of kind of growing up and having all the toys and watching them with my dad. And like, so a lot of times, like when I'm super stressed or just have a lot going on, like I'll just like put those on the screen and then like I'll do other stuff. Yeah. But like,
and I think too, like we do that also, I think with like around the holidays, I think we nostalgize like the holiday season, and it's like we're watching old, Grinch movies, and I think that's a time of nostalgia, and it's also like kind of coincides with the ending of the year, and so I think there is something really good and very wholesome about that, and the power of nostalgia. Obviously, you can overdo it, but I think it's also nice to sort of look back and remember childhood memories that brought you joy, and I think that can be very beneficial.
Yeah, I think part of my, what I would say for like kind of a defense of nostalgia is like the emotions and stuff that it's stirring back up. Like those aren't fake or artificial. Like those are things that they're reminding you of like real life feelings and emotions and experiences that you had. Like it's still part of your story. Like it's part of your life. It's not just like manufacturing some fake feeling. Like, and I guess my question for you is like sometimes you hear kind of the anti-nostalgic people saying, quit living in the past. Like, why you just continue to look back at all these like shows that came out years ago, or like, like quit just sort of living in the past. And I guess the question would be like, is the alternative to that, like to just constantly be living in nothing but like the now, like the present at all times, and don't look back, don't look ahead. Like, is that a healthy alternative? Like,
no, I don't think it is. And I think the alternative is living in the now, and I think also the future. And so I think if you're not if you don't look back ever, then you're probably always thinking about what's next. And I think that can also be dangerous. And it's not to say you should live in the past, but it's not, it's okay to like remember and be nostalgic from time to time and remind yourself, one, where you came from, the happy days that you had in your past. Like, I think that's a totally legitimate thing to do. Again, don't overdo it, but I think that can help you even, as you navigate the present and on into the future.
Yeah, because the Christian, I think of like the Bible. I think it really sets the like the template for that, where it's like, be present in the now. Like you have a mission. Like you need to, you were put into on earth at this time for a reason, and you need to take that seriously. But the Christian faith has a lot of looking back, kind of spiritual markers. Where do we come from? All the way back to like the Garden of Eden, and like this is the story. Then obviously it has very much like a looking to the future, and like the second coming of Christ, and heaven and eternity, and like so it kind of brings all three together. And I think you kind of need all three, like to make sense of the now. You need to understand, kind of have the perspective of the past, and also look ahead and know like this isn't all there is. Like that there's going to be more. That I don't know. Sometimes I think like the live in the moment has almost become adopted as like the healthy Christian approach, when really it's more of like it's almost like a more juvenile, like I'm just living for now, man. Like I just life's a party. Like,
I think it's an incomplete way to live, and you're right. Like the Bible is just full of like stories and admonitions to like remember where you came from, remember what God did before with your ancestors, and so on and so forth. And I think in this sort of now in the moment culture, and I think a lot of that's thanks to social media, that we forget to like, okay, well, what did our ancestors do? What happened before us? And then, what was your life like, in the early days? And so both, nostalgia for your own life, but I think also even going back further and just seeing what God has done, and looking at those markers throughout your family and throughout your own life, I think are essential in sort of being successful and fully formed in the present.
Yeah, and I think even as like Jesus talking about coming to him like a child, I think there's value in things that help remind us what we were like as a child. Like, not in like an immature kind of childish way, but just like, that we used to find wonder and excitement in just creation and stories and stuff that now we're too like, we've seen it 1,000 times. We're all cynical, or it's just a political message, and that like, like as a kid, you weren't thinking about that. You did appreciate a lot more of just sort of what was going on, and like the the goodness of God, and like the majesty and mystery of the world. And I don't know, for me, some of this nostalgia stuff, like obviously, like you said, like you can't just live your whole life, in the 90s when it's 2021, but there is value in just sort of getting a more healthy, rounded perspective. For sure. So all that to say is, are we going to have a Blue's Clues Collision review?
Maybe.
the reboot season?
TBD.
Yeah, probably not. But let us know, what you guys think of that. Like, how do you balance that? What kind of nostalgic things do you find comfort in?
And who was your favorite Blue's Clues host?
Yeah.
Let us know in the comments.
Hashtag Team Steve. So this week at the Collision, like we said, we're going to be one of another live episode for a couple weeks. We encourage you guys to check out the reviews that the Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Again, the movie's just been killing it at the box office, I guess, relative to the pandemic years, but it's doing really good. Again, it's a great film. Encourage you to check out the review on our YouTube channel or the written review on thecollision.org. Check out some of our articles. I wanted to also just give a shout out. I know some of you probably maybe don't know. We've had it in a corner of our stream for a while, that we have our Collision Volume 1. These are just articles on culture and pop culture that we kind of the first year of the Collision, we've kind of collected into an anthology. We released sort of this book. We have Volume 2 is in the final process, finally, of getting formatted, and that'll be coming out probably in the next month or so. So go ahead and grab Volume 1 while you can. Sort of the plan is to every year just kind of release this as like a collector's thing, just to kind of look back on different collisions and stuff that we did throughout the year.
Yeah.
So stay tuned for that. If you haven't done so, subscribe to our channel, like our page, become a Collider, and just keep up with what we're doing. I do have a lot of stuff in the works, so excited to let you guys kind of jump in on that and to follow us with where we're going. But most of all, guys, stay safe and continue to collide through the world for Christ.